Let's see that. Let's see if we can find it. So this is community um, Beetlejuice. How do I spell Beetlejuice? Okay, let's see if this works. This should be it.
Maybe your study buds will go. What's the blonde's name? Bitter Butter Beetlejuice?
This Gwynnifer must be real special. Don't you usually wear the stripy turquoise Beetlejuice numbers?
Okay.
There's nothing.
Let me go back to that. Okay, so this is from the first clip is from season 1, the second clip is from season 2, and the third clip is from season 3.
Study buds will go. What's the blonde's name? Bitter Butter Beetlejuice?
This Gwynnifer must be real special. Don't you usually wear the stripy turquoise Beetlejuice numbers?
There's nothing in your playlist but Spooky Party, the Beetlejuice soundtrack, and NPR podcasts.
Did you see that? So that's a 3-season ridiculous Easter egg from just madness, and you have to somehow remember it all.
Hey, do you? This is back to the community days. You did that 6 years.
We did it.
Come on, dudes. No. Joel McHale, what are you talking? The first.
Maybe your study buds will go.
Anyway, pretty ridiculous. But I mean, and it's sort of to your point, like you're reading what people have said about it. It is a crowdsourced thing. There's so much happens in shows, like in general, that they're really complicated because the web sort of exists. You can have this fandom, really, yeah. So it's almost mandatory to put a lot of Easter eggs in to get it going. Occasionally a Starbucks cup in Game of Thrones just to really crank it.
I think Claire and Spencer here yesterday got this like a TED talk by Aaron Hirschberg, and the whole thing was like storytelling, and
yeah.
Joel McHale came up a few times. He was like one of the core components
of storytelling. Or Dan Harmon?
Just like one of the anecdotes he told was about how they had to do this like commercial for a museum,
Uh-huh.
and how like all the stuff was just like really weird stuff in the art museum, like the UCLA like art museum or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And their solution was to like, well, how do we get people to like not freak out if this just like weird art or like accept it? And they had like a YouTube video they did in one take with Joel McHale and Will Ferrell that they just like ripping on the art. But people were like, oh, okay.
So they just ridiculed it. Yeah. It's weird, right? It's weird what people. I mean, obviously, this is the story, right? Half of the money in advertising is wasted. We just don't know which half, right? And no one knows who said that, and if it's really whatever. It's just a thing. It's been around for 100 years or something, that line. So yeah, you have to keep trying because you want people to, right? Anyway, we're in an age of lots of experimentation with social media in terms of trying to get you to buy something because you like something on Instagram or whatever. It's pretty serious. Anyway, but like as a viewer, like that's a ridiculous thing to spot. Like someone figured that out, but that's a team effort, So I mean, I watched it really well. I mean, because you can watch it again. That never used to be the case. If you missed a show, it was gone. I guess I did reruns a lot, but that's sort of weird, right? So anyway, people can really know the lore of these shows and quote them. Okay, so I know, madness. Let's see. So this is I wanted to show this curiously funny little thing here. So maybe I'll start with this part. I thought we could do it. I've tried to write it up into an assignment question, but basically take whatever you have. This is for novels, and just remove the stuff we're mostly interested in, which is the words and numbers, and look at what's left, right? So this is Cormac McCarthy on the side, and this is Absalom by Faulkner. I mean, it's a bit of an art project, right? So there's a bunch of these sorts of things, I think. And then you can, look at histograms of punctuation. This is just words per sentence. That's a different kind of game. But there's sort of some funny textures. And just as a sort of a visual, let's see, I think was it not? I don't want the wide one. Wide is kind of rude about it. It's not that one, I think. Yeah, this is a nice way to do it. It's not the way you would read a book, right? But this is Alice in Wonderland, and it's a Christmas Carol. It's fine. It's Jane Eyre, an autobiography, I think. All right, Pride and Prejudice. What's the one? So it's a bit of a funny thing to do. Wow, that is actually making it small. That was really mentally painful. Sonnets, but they're keeping in the, that's kind of weird. But, you know, so these are more art things, but there are some statistics for it. And in fact, there's some whole, if I do have this paper here, you know, people have really dived into this, right? Narrative text punctuation marks obey the same statistics as words, right? So they go right into it, and let's get some, yeah, some zip distribution action here. So it is tricky, right? You've got to get in there and kind of deal with what they are. So this is a quotation mark, and this would be a period and a comma. Something like Google Books. Google Books in the data you can get from it, it does have frequencies for everything, commas, blah, blah, blah. But you can't search for that online because you use commas to break things apart. So it's a weird. So what's weird is you can't search for the most common text element in literature because it starts to fold in on itself. But yeah, pretty maniacal. So I think this is where they've mixed it in with words. Anyway, so some kind of fun art projects. I have one more there. Let's see if that's any better in terms of visualization. This is just an article about it, I guess. Yeah, these are better looking things. Wow, this is great. Yeah. But so this is sort of, okay, it starts at the outside. Oh, it's very confusing. This is very confusing. Maybe this one's a better one. I think that's true. It starts at the outside. Wow. So I don't know. That's a peculiar thing to look at, but kind of an interesting piece. Strange. All right. Okay. All right. I'll give you something slightly different. So this is, and then we'll look at this fun stuff. So this is a pretty interesting piece. So I think the best one to look at, for some reason they don't all run the full. It's a little GIF, to use the archaic version. So unfortunately, there's a ridiculous. How do I get rid of that? Do you know? Is there some way to? If I click on this, is that bad? No. Okay, so that should be 1822, 40. Yeah, so this is like the 1850s. We'll run it a couple of times. So, how's your history and of this kind of whole American thing going on? Like, does this, now we're the 20s, and you start to see something, I think, different, 40s. Right, 60s. So this is just, every point is a post office, just to be clear. And that should get to 2000. So a bit of a topic of the last few years, of course. What's that?
I thought when it got to 2000, I thought it didn't stop and restart. I thought like all of a sudden all the buses were going. I'm like, what happened? Did Y2K just destroy the
FedEx, right? FedEx, I think, famously was thought to be was some students in a business school thing somewhere, and they kind of proposed it in a class thing, and were ridiculed by the genius professor. Because, you know, how could you compete against the post office?
This is not important, but
Sure.
I mailed my Christmas card on December 10th, and it was received on February 3rd in May. So, not even that far.
I do have a whole piece on networks and delivery systems, so we'll get to it, but that's not good. If you got on a plane and tried to go to whatever, and that's what, you know, I mean, it's redistribution of things, stuff, sometimes people, when we think about planes, that's pretty bad. Occasionally you hear those stories of like, we found a whole bunch of stuff that slid down behind a counter like 80 years ago, and now we're gonna deliver it all. So, you know, there are those things, but yeah, I don't know. Wow, that's not good. Anyway, what does happen is you see this, you can see it, they're blinking out, 60s, 70s, which is because, right. So now we're suburbs and cars and, yeah, it's a big change. But yeah, that kind of movement across, you don't, you can see the density of people, and there's a beautiful density law that we'll talk about. I did talk about in parks, but we'll look at again in various ways. There's the Cape filling in, Long Island. What is that? What is that? Is this, what's this one? It's Oklahoma? So what's going on with Oklahoma? Right. So it's just not, yeah, it's a separate box. But then it gets, it does kind of get erased, right? You don't see that structure anymore. But yeah, there's this stretch across here. Anyway, pretty interesting data set. And of course, you have where the population is over time. So you can look at this kind of geography of fairness thing, or right, how well are these things being allocated over time in response to where people are and so on. And much decrying recently of problems with, I mean, oh my God, but problems with the post office and things being changed, and it is complicated. Yeah, so probably post office. But I mean, in principle, it is in the Constitution, right? The post office. Look at you guys. A lot of amendments to that thing, right? Which is fair enough. That's kind of how you should do it. But okay, so I think that, so there's a book with this. There's a historian worked on this. Where is his stuff? So I think he's got a nice paper about it. It's pretty slim, right? So there's this kind of thing. This, for some reason, is only the West. Discontinued, blah, blah, blah. It's not bad. But for some reason, this only goes up to 1902. I don't know why, given that they have the data. So, one of these efforts to make a big visualization, and it's still going. Wrote a book. Yeah, what was the last thing? What was that? What did you guys just say? Oh, Constitution. How long is the Constitution? It's pretty slim. What about the amendments? That's not spelled right. Is that right? Including the 27 amendments.
The amendments are usually pretty sparingly worded to allow for.
The sequencing of them is a little tough to look at. Yeah, I mean, right, there were a lot of things to be fixed up, but and remain so. But okay. Women could vote 18 or 19, right? I mean, it's down the list. The last Western country, or within countries or state or whatever, to allow women to vote, it's 1990, and it's a canton in Switzerland. You could become, I think, elected as a woman there, but only men could do the election. Until 1999, and they're like, all right. My God. All this to say, we are still very much dragging ourselves out of, Steven Pinker says it's all awesome now, so we're great.
Somebody's already done you're like the most complex or most happy constitutions or whatever they're called in every other country, if they have something like that.
Well, some of them are built rights approached, and some of them are here are the things you can't. It's not necessarily a constitution, but it's like a legal system. It's like you're not allowed to do this. It's an interesting kind of operating system thing, right? Here are the forbidden things, or if you do them, this is what happens to you. And then others are these are well, like the US. Here's what you're allowed to do. Well, here's what, yeah, right. Um, I don't know. I think Chile is like rewriting it, right? Like they just ripped it up and they're going to start again. So the Norwegians talking about themselves for doing so well in the Olympics, and one of them was like, "Well, we don't really compete. Like we don't have, there's no sort of places or whatever or something when they're young. They just do it for the love of it and whatever. It's for joy and happiness, right? Yeah, So I mean, I don't know if that's true because a number of them get caught for doping as well, right? So it's like so it's a little complicated. Because you always hear these sorts of things like we just do it for Lance Armstrong, for example. Years of saying I just train really hard, because of doping. Okay, so maybe I'll have one. But look, legal system, like whole legal systems and how they're structured. There is work on, for example, Supreme Court decisions on which things get cited and over time, and then which ones are the most critical ones. And people have used like Google type search things to kind of estimate the most important decisions, blah blah blah, all these sorts of things. Yeah, no, I mean there's a lot, and these are really nice temporal things that have evolved. Whether they're still good things to study, probably. A lot of this stuff has been done in the last 20 years. Got the data together, probably a bit of a mess. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to try to just get further into this because I know there's good things in here. So this I mentioned, this is this ambient happiness stuff. So you can imagine doing this is for tweets, which is very simple, right? If a tweet mentions Trump or Obama, then we can take it and you score it. You can do it for a sentence if within some text, like the New York Times, within phrases, within sentences, within paragraphs, some sort of structured thing. People do things where they sort of do plus or minus 10 words. You have to figure out if these are reasonably principled things. But this is correlation. This is Obama's job approval here. It's somewhat messy, but you can see there's a decent correlation a quarter ahead. Lots of words that pop up that are running president or country scale kinds of things, war, Iraq, blah blah blah, tax bailout, lots of fun things, bombing. These are it's pretty. Banks is What is this? This is Q1 to Q23. So let me just say this is the first quarter, right? So of his tenure, the 23rd one. So we're 6 years into it. So it's dropped. And there's less of these words being used then, because straight away he comes in with the housing crisis situation. So the overall score has gone down, but it helps to not have these words in there because they suck. And obviously tax, no one likes that one. There's less about Afghanistan, and much as it was still going along. This is the horrible sort of history of Afghanistan from the West perspective is, the forgotten war is a framing for that, right? So anyway, there's generally speaking, terrorist war, but Iraq is here, of course, threats, crisis, things are a little complicated. These are, some of the sort of just straight up trends. This is the overall Twitter here. This is, how it's going. This is this H1N1, the swine flu. It was called swine flu initially. So those words are in there, becomes known as H1N1 because the pork industry got upset. This is not good for business to call it swine flu. I mean, I don't know why I don't know why you do like Hurricane Katrina. I mean, now you've destroyed the name, you idiots. Just call them all Hurricane Adolf. Anyway, what's 1, 2, 3?
The black line is for sentiment of happiness of tweets with the word Obama.
Yeah. Sorry. So it's messier, and this is his birthday, so it's like happy birthday. There's probably hate in there as well, but they're, balanced out. Uh, so you don't see Obama's birthday in the overall trend, but eventually in the years to come, we would finally see, you would see it for like One Direction members or something. There'd be like a happy birthday thing or something. Might actually be that popular that it would push the whole signal up. But BTS for sure. Like when one of those guys has a birthday, it's like, because they're just, the BTS army is very real, and you want them to be on your side. But if a fandom goes against, like, could be bad. These are, how do you get through all of these? So we're trying to automate these. These are sort of ones that we did back then. Maybe, I guess we did the LabMT words, so maybe 10,000 words. But this is Walmart. You can see it's sort of trending around the average for Twitter, some up and down. So there are things like, that's an advertising thing. These are some bad things that have happened. There are shootings in Walmarts. Tracy Morgan sues because it was a Walmart truck, I think, hit him in the New Jersey Turnpike, or hit his car, and several people died, and he was pretty strongly injured. An employee trampled. I mean, right? I don't know if that's. I don't think it's Thanksgiving, but Thanksgiving, like Black Friday, can be pretty dangerous in some of these places. When IKEA's open for the first time in new countries, I think they're much more careful now, but there have been deaths, people just being run over to get to the spicy meatballs or whatever they have. IKEA, by the way, right? So it's structured, the top of them is this big maze where you kind of go through all these like happy Scandinavian setting things, like bedrooms or whatever. So they're big sets. So it's a big maze, and then you go down an elevator, and the idea is that, and there are no windows, of course, that you've kind of got into a psychological state of stress that when you descend down, you buy all the wooden robots and meatballs and stuff, because you're just like these are manageable. So it's there's a real conception of how to mess with people's heads.
Familiar with SCP, that whole thing?
SVP,
SCP.
SCP, what is it?
No, it's like this wiki where people like make up weird things to explain like paranormal things. There's this whole one about IKEA.
Should I look at this?
IKEA that you can never get out of. There's no escape. It's pretty.
I mean, I'm sure people have dreams about that. There's no, right? Is this a day? What am I looking at? IKEA?
IKEA, yeah, go for IKEA.
So is this just a thing? Like this is like
Well, it's like
special containment? There we go.
written to be read as nonfiction.
Yeah, right.
But it's fiction.
Oh no, I've messed around in this thing before.
It's a really interesting community.
It's a whole thing, right?
Yeah, it's like a writing exercise.
Oh, my wife probably knows about this. Actually, it's a episode in Legends of Tomorrow where one of them's hell is IKEA, and she has to escape from it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if this paper is inspired by that.
Yeah, it's quite nicely done. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So some of these are awful things. There was a bad shooting right in the bigger Hedonometer, I think. Some of those shootings, of course, don't make the big scale. Well, actually, let's look at that. Right? Do they even? So if you see this, right, there's just nothing there on the overall Twitter thing. They just didn't register. So zooming in on them, you see it. Shootings. It can be hard to remember. This is a real issue. Like, how do you? I think it was it here? There are a number of shootings. Oh no, that's maybe different. All right, terrible. Sorry. It doesn't always work. This is snow. This is a spoiler. I mean, everyone dies pretty much, but well, he sort of doesn't, right? Or something, right? So yeah, right, right. What happens again? He
He like comes back.
pretty much intact, right?
Yeah, he got stabbed and then he's like actually fine.
Not a zombie
No.
or whatever. Okay, okay. Still, it was played as on-screen death sort of situation, right? You know, the death's off-screen. That's a trope, right? If you see someone die off-screen, probably not dead. Um, anyway, so that's not really. So that's enfolding. It's like the Lost example, right? It's not really a thing. But yeah, Game of Thrones really got talked about tremendously. That's just the word snow, and I think
Did he do that? Did he? So the bastards are their last name if they're from the winter house, like the cold places. Their last name is Snow. I just realized he probably did that because winter is a traditional bastard last name for like cardinals from
oh,
England.
right,
So he's probably referencing that.
that's not bad. That's not bad.
That's cool.
Yeah. This story wrangler, we'll come back to it, but it's having a little trouble. Come on. Ah, these are just straight up time series, right, for Twitter, which is really hard thing to do. But come on. All right, we may have to. This should be instantaneous. So this is not what we want. It's not good. Let's see if that works. Yeah. So just an example, right? This is unusual for a TV show to be talked about more and more as it goes on. You know, there's sort of enormous discussion here. Oh, this is because they're going to make prequel things or something. Is that what that is? Anyway, of course, people hated the final season, demanding it be remade for the hundreds of millions of dollars that HBO presumably has. But yeah, I mean that's pretty good attention. Usually attention slowly goes away, and I know we looked at these in parts, but let's do it again. We just need all these things put together. So Game of, come on, yeah. So most attention on it, for sure, you know, in terms of the Twitter thing, but also, yeah, pretty bad. Oh my God, that is dreadful. Okay. Dunbar, we talked about Dunbar, right? The Dunbar number, which is this, of course, we're idiots, so we name it after someone who sort of proposed it, but it's this idea that people roughly can handle 150 people in their heads in terms of like a social, you know, this knowledge in their heads. This is early stuff we never really published this, but this is what sort of a measure of information. It's that Simpson thing, and this is the happiness score. So these are based on the number of followers people have. And so you see this sort of this peak in information score around about this sort of, this is you know, 10 to 100 here, 1,000 here. So, you know, here you know, it's not like you don't have, no one cares, right? No one's following you, but now you've got like a small community sort of thing. Like you could have in your, this early Twitter, you could have in your head how many people are watching. And then you switch from narrowcasting to broadcasting. Now it's a bit of a show. So that changes, and the valence goes up as well. So a little bit sort of miserable in this piece, and around this number. So this is sort of, you know, you're behaving more like a human here, right? This is like maybe more you're part of a community where you sort of have a sense of who's around you, and then it becomes like now you've got viewers. So you become worried about that. That's the story. You become worried about how you're presenting things. I know it's an old thing. This is not about contagion. People have made all sorts of claims about contagion and whatever. It's very hard, very, very, very hard to measure influence. But this is Kathy Bliss, one of our first students in Story Lab, did a bunch of interesting things. And this was, one of them was what's the correlation between, so you follow each other. That was the way we, you know, said we have a that's the start of it. But people mentioned each other, right? So reciprocal reply. So it's a little bit stronger because following is pretty weak, especially as time has gone on, in terms of a signal that you really are watching someone else. So this is you've mentioned someone else so that you're replying to them. So there's actually some tethering. So we use that as a measure of the network. And this is the number of links away from people. So these are people someone interacts with. Then this is it's a weak correlation, but this is a correlation between the expressed happiness and it decays. And this sort of it's obviously very much gone out here, but this sort of comports with other things like the small world stuff from Puck's Volume 1, which is that once you get out to here, this is 4 steps away from you, right? This is your friend, friends of friends, and then we can't keep saying the words, but this is these are basically random people. So you don't have to go very far out, which is why disease spreading is so bad. And I haven't. I'll try to put it in at some point, but and you've probably seen it elsewhere, but I should talk about it. There's a sort of a beautiful result for basic network structure, which is that on average, your friends have more friends than you, right? And that's sort of been borne out in a bunch of other kinds of things that are somehow correlated with degree or the number of friends you have. So on average, say on Google Scholar, if you take an average person and look at the people, their co-authors with their co-authors have more citations than them. Like, there are probably some things that kind of, like a lot of these things are sort of positives that would make you feel sad as the ego, the character in the middle. It's all to do with the fact that, if you land on a random link and run one way or the other way, that's different to sampling from a person. So, yeah, I don't know if people have found like people have more money or whatever, but there's sort of this built-in kind of ratchet for keeping up with the Joneses kind of from it. You just know other people and they know other people, and it's just, they are sort of just better than you on average because you're sampling them in a weird way. It's terrible. Hopefully they, have other things like more diseases and more crimes or whatever. But maybe it's all good. I saw this. I don't know if this is. I don't know what to make of this. This is science. This sort of scientific result that allegedly more beautiful people have more. Like, what was it? There was some white cell thing count was higher. This is really bad. This is just a bad finding. This is just like such a eugenics kind of story. But I don't know. But yeah, got all these people rated. Which, I mean, why are you even doing this? And then tested their blood or whatever. So so it was the story that floats that is beauty is not just skin deep, right? It was actually it's in your blood. It's
not any better. What are they trying to convey with that? I feel weird about it.
It's not good. It's not good. Well, there's all these other things like if you take blood from young people and put them to older people, they heal faster. Which, yeah, right. I mean, I don't know what's going on in Silicon Valley, right? The blood boy, you got right. Who turns out not to be such a good specimen, but that basically, you're just a step away from vampires, right? That's like, it's just like, socially justified vampires. It's terrible. All right, terrible things. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. Paper about that, like it had never occurred to you.
They might be just stoked about it. Like you don't, like you come across these things, you're like, oh, so the Facebook contagion stuff, which if you're in data ethics, we talked about, and maybe we can bring it up again here, but that study, which was just a fiasco, right? Which was, just to summarize quickly, they messed with the feed. Maybe this is 10 years ago. Messed with the feed, did this, and they were using the kind of stuff we do here, right? They were basically taking out posts that had maybe more happy words than sad words. So they're doing a very simple thing. They weren't really taking them out. They were just pushing them down because now you've, what they. Facebook's just changed it. It's not going to be called the news feed anymore. It's just going to be called the feed. I saw that the other day. I don't know why that was a thing. But what's the best? Did you see the other?
They got like a call from like a Zoom call from Zuckerberg.
Come on.
Like, yeah, you're
Yeah.
not called like employees, you're called metamates.
Yes.
Oh god.
Did you see this? I mean, you see it. This is amazing. So now they're metamates.
That's a sick title on resume. Metamate.
Well, they should. Human resources is going to be metamates resources. Like, going to change it all. Like, go right into it. Oh my god. It's hard to. I don't know what's going on.
That whole thing is weird. It's not even like a new technology. It's like, what if like the metaverse was a huge deal and everybody cared about it? And that's the whole.
Well, we had Second Life, and Second Life sucked.
Yeah.
We've already got online games. I mean, people like that, but it's not like you're pretending to be in a meeting. Or go shopping, like pushing a cart and like trying to find the salmon over here. You're just like,
Like peak pandemic where like people who like to do code reviews like in person would like put on VR headsets and like sit down at a desk in VR and like flip their code on screen in VR and like review it with each other. And it was just like, can't you screen share?
Screen share.
What else you're doing when you like you're also just sitting and staring at a screen.
But like Zoom or whatever is really democratizing, right? Because everyone's got a little box. It's randomized between people, as far as I can tell. I think.
Share the computer screen. Like you guys can both control. Like
Yeah. Zoom's terrified of that because of bad things that happen. But I mean, they're very different. Yeah. Metamates. Oh God, what was I going to say about Facebook? Something about Facebook. No, I've forgotten it.
ideas like, wow, we have like virtual reality.
Well, it's just a emotional contagion study, right? Which was, so you're messing with the feed, right? And we had to talk about metamates. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just, you're messing with the feed, and the idea was to see, do people stay online? I mean, this is what people have spent the last 20 years doing instead of working as professors. They've gone up and made a lot of money by basically keeping eyeballs, attention became the great thing. You just want attention. Eyeballs. And so how do you want people to stay on Facebook? Like, it's interesting to see, like, Apple's like, maybe you shouldn't look at this thing anymore, right? They're trying to kind of push it the other way. So that was the game, right? So here's the setup. Well, we'll just sort of mess with the feed or the news feed to kind of make happier things float to the top a little bit. You'll still see the other things in principle, but we'll just push up. So they did this, and of course they did it with like, I don't know, 100,000 people, 1 million people, it's an enormous experiment. And they found this minuscule effect, right? That there's a p-value, but it's a minuscule effect. So basically, there was really sort of no result to that. But in terms of like the ethical side of it, really awful. And it got enfolded with Cornell because there's a researcher there who was a professor there who was part of it. But then they sort of say, it's kind of all the IRB stuff. You just sort of say, like, either you're doing experiments with people and you have to like do all the things and they have to sign forms, or the data just falls off a truck kind of thing, which is what they kind of framed that as. It's like, I just put a lot of data over here. I wasn't involved with the thing. And, that wasn't really true. It was in PNAS. It got a huge, so it was the most talked about paper by some measures, altmetric, for example, in the year it came out. But if you look at the stories, they're all negative. They're all comparing it to, Nazis, to blah, 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 Big Brother. They were really quite, it was interesting. The reaction was pretty bad. So it was a bad story for them. And they actually shut down everything kind of in terms of this openness that they were sort of had a little bit of. At the time. Anyway, lots of stuff. I mean, and I just showed you this thing from Kathy Woods. It's not about contagion. We're not really, it's very hard to measure, very hard to measure. Anyway, all right, let me try to explain this thing. So this is I know you've done an assignment, but let's see if we can kind of or you're playing around with it at least. Okay, so this is Twitter, right? And this is this thing where we have this distribution of words in terms of scores. There's 1,222 words. These are the ones we got ratings for, built out of Twitter, Google Books, New York Times, and music lyrics. and they're common words. So the is in the middle, so are the swear words and those things that on average have these kind of neutral scores. So we sort of look at this and say, okay, there's a ton of stuff in here. Maybe if we remove some of these, we'll get rid of these problematic ones like we don't need to score, we don't need to count all of these and score them and say they're 5, right? That's not useful. But curse words or Beatles or McDonald, like people don't agree on them, so we shouldn't be using them sort of as in isolation. So the idea was, we played around with a few things. The idea was just to start a stop window in the middle where you center it at neutral and then go out evenly. You could talk about doing that in a different way, but I think I'll kind of argue for why this is reasonable. Because again, this is still a Likert scale. This is like not at all, a little bit, somewhat, a fair bit, tons. It's a 5-star rating this way and a 5-star rating this way. So even though it's on a continuum scale, there's sort of the adjacent integer, which is kind of meaningful. Okay, so all of these are connected, like this dot here, this dot here, this dot, they're all connected. I'll try to explain. So what we're going to do is score with all of the words and then open up this little window and throw those out. So this is the window of, it's a 1, so it's plus or minus 1 around here, so it's 2 times this little delta average. We're going to get rid of that and then use these as scores, and that's the black time series here in the middle, right? That's the 1. And so the least, if we don't throw anything out, that's this bottom one, and as we increasingly throw out these, we just going to make this stop window bigger, then we kind of move up through this, and you've seen maybe some funny things. It might come back down at the top, but they're sort of floating up, and that is because there's this skew, which we'll talk about later. There's a skew towards positivity. This is types versus tokens once again, right? Types are the lexicon, that's your dictionary. It's the sort of the species, and then the tokens are how many actually appear. So in this case, we're just talking about types, right? The word "the" has 1 count in this histogram. Chicken has 1 count. Trump has 1 count. There's actually is in there. So they all have 1 count. When we score this thing, of course, we use the frequency. This is a token-based thing. So because of that positive skew, as you sort of throw out this thing, which is more neutral, and they're very common words like "the" and so on, they're going to squish the average down. It's drifting up. Now you see the average is at least 5.4. I mean, it's low down there, but it's going up. It's all positive, and so this is a general thing we see as well, is that between 5 and 7 for reasonably large texts is what kind of comes out of this system. Yes, we have very negative words, we have very positive words, but we're averaging them, right? So there's going to be a limit. Okay, so this is a bit funny. So which one do we choose? We're changing this lens. So this is a lexical lens. We're changing the lens. This is an aperture of sorts. We're blocking things out. As we do that, we'd like this thing to be stable, at least. I mean, that will be something, even though there's sort of no, maybe, there isn't really necessarily an absolute value that we will put it around. But if these shapes are the same, then, we've kind of got something. There's some real robustness to this instrument. So that's what this plot is, again, using the terrible color scheme. But it's a correlation of these time series with each other. You can see this data loss missing here. That's what that is. So we're just going to correlate each of these time series with each other. There are, I guess at this scale, this is 0.1. So there are 30 time series. By 30 time series, it's only showing you a few, right? It's 0.2, 0.4, 0.6. So there's all these other ones in here. We're just going to correlate them with each other. And what you see is for this small window, those shapes are correlated with each other. So maybe this one and this one are pretty similar, right? But then when you get to about 0.5, there's a break, right? So these, and it's symmetric, where the window is between, say, 0.5, and there's a little bit of change here. And again, it's another sharp change. We have sort of a block in here. There's a little bit of a line here for sure, but there's a block in here where these time series mostly agree with each other. And then it goes to pieces again as we go past maybe 2.5. So what we ended up saying is, well, you need to kind of at least have a window of 0.5 plus or minus 0.5, but getting out past 2.5. Now you've got 2.5 would be here, and here you're down to a very few words, right? And you can imagine as it gets to there, it's going to get your very thin measurement. It's going to get sort of, they're going to be extreme words. It's useful, but it's going to start to blow apart. So these are saying this, basically giving us the same shape, so that's useful. What's happening is the variance is going up because we're averaging more extreme sets of words. So it's a bit like turning the gain up on a image, right? With like sharpening the boundaries. There isn't necessarily a perfect space in there, but you want to maintain coverage. This one is to show you as you open up the window, how many words are still, how many words, this is of the type, so this is types, this is tokens. How many of our words do we have? We started with over 10,000. When we open up to 1, which again is this point here, it's this window here, and it's this one here, then we're down to below 4,000 words, right? So we've tossed out quite a few, right? There are about 6,000 a few words in this middle window here. And that keeps dropping and dropping, and once we get up to 3 or 2.5 is here, we're really down to a few. This is for Twitter itself. This is to show you how much coverage. So if we use the 10,000 words to start with, we've actually got 85% coverage, which is pretty good. These are going to be rare words, but all things like the and of and, right? They're all in there. We start to throw them away. When we're down to this one that we kind of like, it's about 20%. That's still okay. And this is to show you how the coverage decays, and it's connected to these time series. So this is our time series as we go out and word rank. Which ones do we have? So we're, kind of missing them to start with, and of course it decays straight away, more strongly later on. This is where we have all of the words, and we're looking at Twitter. So we're going out and word rank for what we actually see. The real thing here. This is based on our lens. So we have all of them. You see some little drops here. But as we go through those first 5,000, it's like, oh yeah, we have that in our lens. We have it in our lens. And then it starts to decay, right? So out to 20,000 words. That one's a bit tricky. But, this often isn't sort of shown. But the idea of this is to say, you've got a lens of words. You're going to score. You've got the actual text. How many are you missing? Are you missing anything important? And it's been pretty robust over now, more than 10 years, but we did realize that we had to score coronavirus and COVID-19 and these kinds of words. We have a paper that's not finished, but it's about essentially the idea is to kind of have somewhat of a real-time thing that says, like pushes words out and says, this word you should score. It's like being really frequently used. It's not in your lens. If you had a score for it, it could actually affect the overall score.
How is rating words by asking people versus looking at words in context of other words you've rated to try and aggregate an average happiness of them?
Yeah.
Different, or this is what think about trying to do the second one now? Or?
Yeah, so that is in these ones here. It's a bit tricky, but these are there's a whole bunch. There's a big section where we were trying to do that. I mean, some of these words are phrases, but this is a word church for which we have a score. I mean, we did get scores for all of these. It's the words around church are a little bit happier than it is, but they're pretty good. These words, because happy is paired with Christmas, and so on. So we did do that a little bit. There are various pieces in there trying to do it. I think what we're able to see is that generally that's kind of roughly true. Yeah, it's just this one. So this is a correlation coefficient of words with the ambient text, and so this is a Spearman correlation. So point set. It's decently strong. Yeah, it's got to be a bit messy, right? It's got to be a bit messy, but it wasn't a zero correlation. Certainly wasn't. So that wasn't bad. I think a lot of it is because there are simply more positive words than negative words. So it's just going to work that way. Yeah. It took a long time to really kind of understand that. But I wouldn't. We don't want to use. we wouldn't want to bootstrap it that way. I think we tended to keep the approach of asking people. You could for sure, and there are other systems that do that. They basically use a thesaurus approach, anchor a few words. There are a lot of these lexicons out there, and some are just like one dude. There's one called Afin. It's just a guy who just like rated them all, and people use it because it's in R. It's built into R. And you're like, what are you doing? That doesn't seem right. But people generally, it's not far off. Yeah. I mean, you can run those sort of experiments again. We had the ANU ones. We did ANU again, but on Mechanical Turk. Completely different group. Really strong correlation. ANU was done by another group, in Spain. I think I mentioned this. They just translated the words and asked people in Madrid rather than students. I think just people on the street more. Pretty good correlation. I'll show you. We have things where we translate, Chinese and Korean, Indonesian, like we have all these 10 different languages where we got them all scored by native speakers and then quite highly proficient speakers actually. And then you can translate them back and forth and it generally is pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah. To the point that, you see lexicons like someone does a whole thing for English and then they just raw translate it all into like 150 languages and say, you can use these scores too.
Oh, yes. Because of the happiness bias, do you notice in that correlation, do you notice anything when you look at like just the negative words, if they had a weaker correlation with their context?
Yeah, I guess we didn't do it quite. We just did the whole thing. Yeah, so I couldn't tell you about that right now. It's a good question. It's a good question. Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's no plot of that for some reason. I don't make a plot. Okay, it's a good question. But it's words. We're breaking things up. I mean, there's always this sort of things like, well, what about not happy and da da da. People say unhappy and all these sorts of things. Not happy is not as common as happy, so you don't quite have too much of a problem with it. But one thing that's is it this thing? Oh, my wife's twin is in town, and so the family is. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is an interesting thing about the positivity thing is sitting in a language, the way, at least English especially, but I mean, it's true, you can see it all through the European ones, is the prefix to turn something to the opposite, right? So there's mal and un, of course, dis, we have a bunch of these things, right? Anti. Usually the anchor word is a positive one. And it's just the way we do it. I mean, language is this, we can use it to do everything and say terrible things, but it is a fundamentally kind of pro-social interaction thing. I mean, it's our great social technology. It really is. It's an amazing technology. Money's pretty interesting too, in terms of like putting belief out there. But so the anchors are mostly positive words. It's not always true, right? And you get some weird ones like disingenuous or something, like it's a little anti-disestablishmentarianism. It's like, what are we doing? So you have a few of those, but yeah. So maybe that's just sort of the positive matter. It's also was more useful for us to kind of lean towards that, so that when we have an un, we tend to know it's a negative, right? You could unmurder someone, but there's not a lot of that. There's not a lot of those.
It feels like at some point in human history or prehistory, it should have been more advantageous to have the negative words be more efficient.
Okay. Well, that's not to say they aren't really salient and really important and diverse in what they cover. And it's sort of true. And maps towards the emotions as well, right? Sort of, we have this positivity, negative things that can happen to us. There's a lot. It's a system story too. Like you want to be able to rather specifically say, not there's a bad thing happening, but you need to say, you know, I've been poisoned or whatever, a tree fell on the house, not just house is bad. Right? You need to be able to. So, and we do have some pretty, you know, and some of them are very fundamental, like disgusting. It's like bad taste, you know, which amoebas probably get, you know. So like, there's really good ancient biological kind of structures in there, I think, for the emotion stuff because they're big signals, and we have more negative ones. Right? So, but we don't. I mean, and some, you know, and some people live in a way where they feel them all the time. Right? I mean, context could be terrible and you're kind of in a bad state all the time. But sort of by and large, that's a hard way to be, but it's by and large, you know, we kind of, even in the worst of things, people tend to kind of find a way to be a little bit better. It's just that on average, you know, this is the use of the words, right? We don't want to talk about negative things all the time because they really matter. Like if something, it's the boy who cried wolf, right? If something is really wrong, you need to be able to say it. So it doesn't mean the good things we're talking about are amazing. Could be the weather, right? The stupid baseball. You know, like people talk a lot about basic stuff that's like okay. You know. Okay, so this is a thing to unpack, right? I have, and you guys are the first people to ever do an assignment question that does this. So,
I just got worried that my code was broken when it at some point like looked like it was breaking, and then I spent like half an hour thinking about it, and I was like, okay, no, that makes sense.
It's pretty good. Only half.
Maybe like put a disclaimer in there or something. I don't know. Or maybe you want to encourage that kind of like critical thinking.
I do want to encourage that. What was that? What was your concern? That
well, because of the graph. So.
Oh, you mean because it started to go down? That
well, it started jumping around a lot once because.
It's going to get messy, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Once you go out far, it should shatter. It should, you know, it's going to shatter once you get out to here. And obviously, at the end, you have no words to score.
Yeah. Yeah. Then I noticed it. I figured it out when I saw the last graph. When since my average was like 5.56, all of the upper words were cut out, and then the whole graph was like at 1.5, and I was like, okay, that makes sense.
That's weird. Yeah. Yeah. So now you've gone out, you know, past into here, like your filters. It's again, it's like dialing the thing. There's no image. Now you can see it, and now the images, you know, like the borders are getting sharper. Maybe is one way to think of it. But then you've gone too far, and it's turned into snow. So the last thing I wanted to sort of say about this to tie it all together really is that why is it, you know, why would there be this threshold here? I mean, I think the threshold out here is exactly why you know, it's a long way out, so there aren't many words. It's got to happen at some point. But the fact that it's around a half is because what we're exactly excluding are words that are, if you went to the nearest point on the Likert scale, are neutral. Right? So if we rounded, sorry, excuse me, if we took this histogram away and then just had rounded them to 1, 2, 3, 4, so we just had these, you know, spikes at these things, all of the ones at 5 we're taking out straight away. But because we've got this spread, you know, we can kind of be a little more gradual and nuanced about it. We could have them at these points and then just get rid of those, then get rid of those, then get rid of those. But you know, it is averaging over, you know, typically 50 people's scores, but there is this thing that you really have, on average, people think this is something that is, this word is not neutral, right? And also just, you know, we do have the problem of some of these words are clearly not neutral, but on average, people can't sort them out. That's another piece. But at least in terms of the ones that are, like the and of and they are very reliably people, small standard deviation, but, you know, they rated them as neutral. So they're doing the right thing, which is helpful, right? That was good to see. So this positivity bias is not because people just think the word the is a fun, positive word, you know, by itself, right? Like there's not just I saw a word and I'm happy kind of thing. Like it's not built into like, I'm doing this experiment that you gave me $0 for. You know, like there's not some, it seems genuinely neutral, right? So that was sort of a nice realization. So that there is a snap. You really do want to get rid of these middle ones. So it's a tunable instrument, which is pretty weird. You know, it's language. It's a strange thing. It's a bit of a telescopy kind of thing, but it's more like changing the edges. This is a crazy thing. This is hour 13, 2010 across the whole year. This is sort of an early attempt to try and look at, you know, where words are based on their happiness and how much they're used, and this is where we've taken out this average of 5, right? So that we put them around a neutral point. So these are sad, negative ones. I could zoom in these a little bit, but it looks like some sort of lung X-ray that's gone wrong. You can see the preponderance of words out here. These lines here mean that the contribution is the same, right? So this is where, right, so these are increasingly negative words, but they're used less, so they kind of have a similar weighting, if you like. So, and again, this is just for Twitter, right? So if you move through this and then do this stop word thing, you can kind of see how it makes a mess of things. That's the 0.5 one, right? This is this threshold where we've really changed things. I think one of the sharper things you see moving out is just the disappearance of the word no. And these are, you know, we have the less words to score, less words to score, less words to score. And this is sort of the problem at the end, right? You're getting to this, I think I get to this one. You get to this edge. It's kind of blown apart. These should be, yeah, they're all zoomable, right? So these are, Saddam is still in there, and tumors and bad things. I cannot, it wants to change a page. I understand. You're a funny thing. All right. Yay, butterflies. Hey. It's pretty good. Angels are out there. It's all happy. Yeah, so various efforts over the years to make these sorts of things more readable. Obviously, you don't want to print all of the words. It's a total mess. So we'll see later on some better efforts. It does look pretty awful. You have 3 minutes to live. Okay. All right. I know we've talked about this, and you know, so there's plenty of stuff we've kind of covered here. So that roared into my ears, and I really want you to hear that. So, because I've talked about this. This is sort of the, how would it do that? All right, let's see what happens. Well, that's Austria. They're unhappy. Iceland is very happy. This is what happens when Iceland is very happy. So, you know, sports, right? Sports is this giant, like, emotional thing. We never published it. We did some work around the Olympics in terms of whether people winning gold medals and silver medals and bronze medals, like how the you know, their countries kind of reacted. Because bronze is good, right? Silver's not as good as bronze in some ways, because silver you could have won gold, bronze you didn't, you got a medal. And it's sort of, it is psychologically kind of works a bit like that. And you could kind of see it. Bronze is, you know, gets a bit of a rating. But I think we had, you know, you have this sort of timeline. And we want to do this with NFL. You know, if you have the score line going through it, it's hard to get hold of these things. Because the data you end up with doesn't exactly have timestamps for when it really happened, right? Because when a score happens, you want to then connect it to the time series of tweets. Anyway, I think it was Brazil versus Mexico. It's the Olympics, you know, soccer, which is, I mean, still matters greatly, of course. But Mexico scored in the first minute of the game. And you can see we have these two time series. I really regret that we didn't make this, but the Spanish time series just goes up through the roof, and the Portuguese one goes with just because it's just full of swear words. It's just I mean, it matters, right? I mean, there are studies of, I know I've talked about this, but I think in Germany, like I think there were studies of like heart attacks, rates of heart attacks after because of essentially because of games, and also people delaying going to the hospital because they're waiting for the game to finish. Um, you're synchronizing all these people, right? I mean, they're all experiencing these things. Anyway, so there was a little data science project from the city of Vancouver when I guess it's not this winter, like maybe 2 or 3 Winter Olympics ago, when the U.S. played Canada I think in the men's hockey final, and you could see, and so it was from the wastewater people, right? You could see the game shape recorded in basically when people went to the bathroom, and it's sort of because it was overtime, and then just the signal sort of goes up and up. But I mean, it's just a weird thing. You've got all these people in this space, like locked into something. Right? Couldn't have happened 200 years ago, right? I mean, we saw the start of the post office thing. That was a big deal because, you could send messages, which might take months to be delivered. Kind of old school, sort of a throwback. But that's a real power. It's kind of incredible. But now you can just, everything can be really correlated. I do think this is a really fundamental, I don't know how to do this, but the tethering together of people at this scale is kind of incredible, and it just sort of breaks against, say, in the U.S., the idea of these quasi-independent states. Not right that they're being their own, Vermont's being Vermont, and Alaska's being Alaska, and that's still true. But if they're watching the same show at the same time, then you get a weird correlation between Alaska and Arkansas, which is just a preposterous correlation in real time. Which sort of breaks the and it's a systems thing. It's good to have this kind of, it's good to have balkanization for many kinds of things, innovation, all these things, judgment, right? Like if people are all following the herd, things go wrong. It's bad when you have a pandemic, right? So that was just not good. You got to be a team. Was it Bill Pullman, right? The Independence Day, stands on top of a bus and says, you've got to when there's an existential threat that's a collective one, you go, well, we can do it. Anyway, there's any number of examples like this, but this is the happiness thing. You've seen these word shifts. Robin Williams was a sad day, couple of days. Not really a huge spike, but this is the same-sex marriage declaration, but it was one of the few times where we've seen a little bit of a bump in positivity, which, of course, as I said, is more of a K-pop thing. Yeah, we did have this. It's not functioning, and of course, you've got the Python one, right? But we did have this one, which because it's nice to have this beautiful interactive thing, but it's a little hard to make. Okay, so how am I doing? It's sort of asleep at the moment, but Quokka Labs is a little startup company we did build a few things for dashboards for places. Quokka, what's our familiarity with a quokka? So it lives on Rottnest Island because the Dutch, sailing around as they were wont to do in the 1600s, decided that island over there off the coast of Western Australia was covered in rats. So it's called Rottnest. Australia was New Holland, right? And New Amsterdam down the road a bit here. And then the Dutch said, no, it didn't work out, right? But then the English appeared. So Australia has a very nice bit of legal action. The lawyers did a good job back in the day. It's terra nullius, which means it was no man's land, right? Because the legal thing was that the people living there, it's the oldest occupied sort of thing, 50, 60,000 years, did not till the land. And that meant no one owned it. So it wasn't a conquest. It was merely we have this, we're walking off the boat. Lawyers making the world better forever. So it's basically just on this island, right? There aren't many of them. They're very dopey little things. But if you search for world's happiest animal, quokka comes up. People take selfies with these things all the time. They're just hanging out. Look at these guys. They're marsupials, like most Australian things, right? So they've got the pouch action, but they're basically some sort of kangaroo crossed with a muppet. Yeah. Wallace and Gromit.
Very small versions of each other. That's amazing.
Yeah, the whole putting people in a pouch thing is pretty funny. Yeah, they really do.
They're already so tiny.
Yeah, they're pretty. These are pretty small units.
Make a smaller, cuter one and put it in its pouch and walk around.
So kangaroos come in all sizes, right? There's a Simpson hopping mouse. Yeah, they're like, yeah. It was a good plan, and they're like, okay, let's make and the big reds are. Yeah. Cutest animal ever. Anyway, yeah. So that's a pretty good comeback from being considered to be rats. Okay, we'll talk about geography. It's fun to talk about geography next time. This is just to show you on it. We don't need to go, but this is a whole body of work. Andy Reagan, who, is still part of the team in general. I tried to fix that up. Anyway, he works for MassMutual now and is just generally awesome human being. This is, right, there are two axes here. This is comparing a number of these lexicons. So ANU is here. This is LabMT. One that's called Luke, LIWC, which we looked at in 2008 and just immediately discarded because it was plus or minus one. It's a bigger thing. It has more stuff about words in it. But in terms of whether words were positive or negative, it's just sort of has a flag for that and would just now and then say it does have emotion and it's plus or minus one. So many of the words in that data set are zero, which is fair enough. And you can use it. You can use it to do these kind of raw things, but it doesn't have the nuance of a scale, right? So, like, I don't know, like smash, like maybe accident with the word accident and murder, they're both minus one, which doesn't feel right. So there's a bit of a complication because we're comparing continuum scores with ones that just have these kind of plus or minus one ones. But this is we don't have to worry about it too much. But this was a detailed thing. It's getting nice citations because there's something wrong with that thing. But it's basically we're trying to understand like all these different lexicons, and maybe there are 20 something in this thing. Like why, it's an EPJ data science. It's a good place to put this. They basically do perform very similarly, except for, if you want to do like this time series kind of thing, except for ANU, which just has too few words and they're just weird, right? So this one really does kind of break down. But it goes to your point, they're pretty robust. Like people, at least when it comes to like using them in aggregate to make some instrument, they generally work pretty well. But we have this point in here that you really want to have, for example, if you just wanted to do a positive lens and a negative lens, these ones that have plus or minus one would be just flat lines because all the words that come through on those filters are just all minus one or plus one. And I don't have it in here yet, and it's a little paper I'm trying to write, but really it's the balance of positive to negative words that give you these time series. There's a lot of nuance in the scores, but it's really about are there more positive words or more negative words? That's really the balance because frequency is something that varies by orders of magnitude, frequency of words, but these scores are in some little box. They're very constrained. So it's a and again we've just had to say word shifts, right? They're really helpful. They tell you if your thing's exploded or you've got the wrong thing. Maybe you put Moby Dick in instead of Twitter, like whatever you've done wrong, it pops up, or it's and then don't use Luke, but people continue to do this. But there are just an enormous number of papers which say, oh, we measured the emotional content, blah blah blah, like the emotional contagion experiment. And we found it went up or down on wet days or windy days or so. We've got all these results, but you never see the words, right? You don't know, were they just measuring weather stations or something like that, which we found ourselves doing at some point, for example, and realized that wasn't great. Anyway, so that's a nice piece of work, but it's a development in building these lexical instruments. This was a good, solid contribution. Okay, I know. President's Day weekend, just everyone's pumped for it. No? What's going on?